One, two, go.
Howdy-ho, everybody. Jim Hightower here with the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour on Facebook. Here we are together again, and today we're going to talk about race. Yes, race. And we're going to talk about the Black Lives Movement. Yes, we are. Black Lives Matter. We're going to talk about this moment in our history. But rather than just reiterating the horror stories that are truly horrible, we're going to talk about what we might do about it. And how to do it. And to help us wind our way through this, we've got a friend of mine, a friend of yours, a noted journalist, author of beaucoup books, runs a podcast called the United States of Anxiety. So if you're not nervous enough, there you go. Kai Wright. Working through WNYC in New York City, talks about his program in terms of being the unfinished business of our history. And he is very articulate about that. Kai, welcome to the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour.
It is a pleasure, and I will do my best not to leave us anxious. But yes. Sometimes discomfort is what you need to find your way to peace and justice. So
there you go. Absolutely right. And speaking of peace and justice, I've got my insouciant libation of the day. This is a little beer out of New Belgium Brewery out in Fort Collins, Colorado, called Voodoo Ranger IPA. This is a wonderful brewery, by the way. I've been out there, and it's a worker-owned brewery. They do the Fat Tire and various other beers, but it is really a terrific beer. And I understand that you have raided your own personal wine cellar.
It's true. I'm a bit of a wino. It is the case, and I like my wine, and I like my wine with a story. So I have, I cracked open. This is a Brown Estate Zinfandel. So Brown Estate is the first and I believe still only Black-owned winery in Napa Valley. They were Caribbean immigrants. Back in the 80s, and they were growing grapes. I mean, so much of the wine business, there's so many elements of it that we don't talk about. One of which is the farmers that grow the grapes.
Yes, hello.
And so they were farmers who grew the grapes for other people's wine for many years. And then finally the kids of the parents who founded it said, well, we're going to make our own wine. And that's Brown Estate. So I am a big fan of them. Another one I would suggest is Maldonado Estate. That's a Mexican-American owned winery. It's same story. They were the farmers, and eventually said, "Well, we'll make our own stuff."
Well, it is a farm product.
It is an agricultural product. We forget all the other nonsense. It's an agricultural.
And before Napa Valley and Sonoma, et cetera, became frou-frou, they were farmers. That's pretty much what they did. They had the dirt under their fingernails, and they produced it like that. Well, let's talk a little bit about you. You grew up where, in Indianapolis? Is that right?
I grew up in Indianapolis. I like to say I'm a Midwesterner raised by Southerners. Like all black people, I'm 46. Like all black people my age in the Midwest, we are but a generation removed from the South and the Great Migration. And so my family my father's family came to Indianapolis via Kentucky, from Alabama, via the coal mines of Kentucky, and that's where I grew up. And it's a big part of like why I do the work. I'll say, is I grew up in a family of overeducated people who had a lot to say about a lot of things. I was the youngest, so I was often sitting in my grandmother's parlor listening to them argue about things, and I decided I would be the referee that led me down this road of journalism, of being the one that says, well, actually, the facts are this.
Yeah, right. And then you became an articulator of that viewpoint, yes. But also of facts and ignored aspects of our lives that we should be talking about, but that much of journalism avoids. Because let's face it, I come out of the journalist tradition just as you do, and I've been on the outside a portion of journalism, and I see New York, Washington bias that just overlooks what's actually going on out there, because often I wouldn't say they're ivory tower journalists, but they're desk journalists. They're studying documents that they see rather than going out into the countryside and actually meeting some of the people who are making the history in our country. You said early on that white supremacy is an economic policy. What the hell does that mean?
Well, it's something we often forget. So white supremacy is a totalitarian system. I think it's important to say up front. It in fact, and I also think it's important to say the lie of white supremacy is a totalitarian lie, and so it affects everything about society. But the purpose of it, starting with European colonialism and chattel slavery in the United States, is to support an economic system that robbed everybody. We love to, and there's a lot of thinkers that have contributed to this idea over the years. But one of the things is, we love to quote King. Everybody loves to quote Martin Luther King, and we love to quote the fuzzy parts of Martin Luther King. We never want to quote the economic justice parts of Martin Luther King. Right. The core of his message. And one of the things he used, one of his lines in his speeches that was most important to me is, and I will screw it up, but to paraphrase, like the slave owner and the rich white man took the world and he gave the poor white man Jim Crow, this gamey old bird that they could eat whenever their stomach cried out for food. And that is one of the core functions of it. It is to convince everybody involved that an economic system that benefited less than 1% of people. Slavery, the slaveholders were less than 1% of the United States. They were the ultimate 1%. Right. That an economic system that benefited those people was actually good for everybody. And in order to do that, you had to create this ideology, and that's what they did. And so we still live with it. So it's an economic system, first and foremost. Affects everything in our society, but its purpose is theft.
Well, I had to discover that myself growing up. A little town of Denison, Texas, right on the Oklahoma border. We were the first line of defense against the Okies. Keep them out from Texas. But it was, I grew up in a totally white community. I went all the way through high school in segregated schools. Had no interaction virtually with the black community that was very present in my town. And yet, my father was a small business person, my father and mother, and they were not racist, but they were not anti-racist, which has become the reality that we face today, and the issue that we're trying to raise. They never participated in any civil rights movements. I'll point that out to you. But yet they were battling the powers that be too. They were taking they had small business. They were having to fight Walmart. They were having to fight the lobbyists down in Austin and up in Washington, and the bankers. They had to go hat in hand to the bankers. And so if you talked about whether they were liberal or conservative, they would have said conservative. But in fact, there were William Jennings Bryan, mad as hell, hardscrabble people who had come out of the Depression to have a small business. Then I went off to college at North Texas State University, not an Ivy League powerhouse, but nonetheless a pretty good school. And there I read history books and was taught history classes that had the word populism in it. And that's when I began to understand what I was and who they were and how most people were that. And that populist core comes down to this thought. Too few people control too much of the money and power. And they use that control to get more for themselves at our expense. So that is the political battle we're in. And that then, if you express it like that, it becomes not a race battle. It becomes a top to bottom battle, the real political spectrum.
the problem is, Hightower, and this is why I say that about white supremacy being an economic system, is that the challenge we've had throughout our history as a country is that the coalition necessary to take apart the top that to deal
Right.
with inequality, it struggles to function because white supremacy is designed to keep it from functioning, and so
Yes.
it is impossible to have a conversation. My challenge with populism has always been it's impossible to have a true populist movement that doesn't deal with white supremacy, because it will
Exactly.
always come back to us, and that's where we're at now. And I mean, that's one of the things that I find hopeful in this moment is that I do see more in folk. One of my favorite scholars, a guy named Ibram Kenji, he is now on the Times bestseller list all the time. People are reading his book, How to Be Anti-Racist. I want them to also go back and read his previous book, Stamped from the Beginning, which is a more difficult read, but it's very important, and it's the history of racist ideas. And one of the points he's
Right.
making is that there is no neutral. There is no I'm not racist, but I'm not anti-racist. That we can't. It just doesn't
Right.
exist
Right.
in this country. And one of the things that white supremacy, the function it does, is to try to convince the vast majority, I believe, of white people who are eager to have a multiracial society, eager to have a society with shared resources, to convince them that they can be neutral, that they don't have to like take a stance in this, and it'll all be fine. Because, but that's not the case. What that
Hasn't worked
does,
out.
it hasn't worked out for anybody. It allows the banks to continue. I pay. Every month I pay my mortgage. I pay. I won't get into the numbers because I live in New York City. It's disgusting, But a quarter of the money I send to the bank once a month goes to my actual equity. A quarter of it. 2/3 of it, or 3/4 of it, goes to all kinds of other shit that is
Right.
about feeding Wall Street and insurance companies, and all of it is giveaway. Why? Because the banks have managed to convince a whole lot of people that lending to Black people is risky.
Yep.
That's at the core.
Yeah.
That's the core of why banks get to steal as much money as they do, is because they have managed to convince everybody that, well, if we have to lend to Black people, it's risky, so we need all these giveaways. So if everybody just agreed that's a bullshit argument and took it apart, everybody's mortgage would go down. We would like this. There is a mortgage insurance I pay for being a first-time home buyer, that everybody pays for being a first-time home buyer. It is a cost that is leveraged against me, and everybody pays it based on a racist argument that banks made about why they needed that security.
Right. And I agree with that. And what I'm saying is that an entry level into this broader discussion, including the white supremacy and the racist nature of the economy, the structural nature of the economy, is to first realize that you're being screwed too.
That's right.
That these bankers are not your friends. And the corporate chieftains who are knocking down wages and holding down the poor, they're not our friends. That you've got to build a broader alliance. Jesse Jackson used to say, we might not all have come over on the same boat, but we're in the same boat now.
But we're in it now.
That is a powerful political reality.
That's right.
And as long as we can talk about that, then we might come together as we have done. And your writings have shown this in history. There have been some bright moments in America's racial history, even coming, not just the Martin Luther Kings, but going back to the situation we were. Deanna and the Lowdown was recently in North Carolina. And we were doing some work with some great folks over there who were fighting at a local level to make life better for everybody. And we learned about the Wilmington massacre of 1898, in that town, and how that had been a community of racial harmony. That black people actually were not only business people and participants in the full community, but that they had forged with impoverished white cotton farmers and with a growing labor movement a third contingent over there, not Republican, not Democrat. Democrat had become the racist party of the Ku Klux Klan, basically, and that they had forged a new fusion politics there that elected the majority, I believe, of the city council in Wilmington, that elected a majority to the state legislature of delegates from Wilmington, and elected 2 United States senators, one white and one black, to the United States Senate. A tremendous moment of progress that lasted about 10 years, and then whammo, 2,000 armed thugs, white, that came in and completely destroyed that town, the black community, hung people, some 300 or so died in that fight. But there was that spark, that moment. And it seems to me, Kai, that we got to grab that spark and find ways to keep it going.
I have to say, I mean, it's one of the things about that in this moment makes me both hopeful and terrified, because the history, there's that beautiful history you just described in North Carolina. There are versions of that all over the South in the years after the war, where you had these remarkable burgeoning black communities. One of the stats I always forget, there were more black people elected to Congress in the first 10 years after the Civil War than the full next 100 years that followed. Right? It was this explosion of civic activity of formerly enslaved people who to public life, business, politics, journalism, all these. There's this humongous eruption of black newspapers, and alongside that, white communities that were like white Republicans at the time who were like, this is great. Yeah, let's have it. We got coalitions. We don't have to be beholden to this slave power anymore. Right. Let's build. And it was a really promising moment. And it was met everywhere. Everywhere it was met with the kind of murderous mass violence that you described in Wilmington. Everywhere. From Tulsa on down. Every community. I mean, one thing I would urge everybody to go to Montgomery, Alabama, go to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice that Bryan Stevenson has made, walk through. There's this memorial to lynching, to the victims of lynching, and look at the numbers. And look at when they happened, when these lynchings happened. They all happened clumped together in huge numbers because they were all about beating back the exact coalition that you're describing. And so it was met with violence. And so here we are today, right? And we see a moment where the Black Lives Matter marches were not only multiracial, but really a lot, really driven by white folks in a lot of places. Right. There are communities that were no black people lived there, and they were marching for Black lives, and so we're seeing this moment where people are understanding things the way they did in Reconstruction. And I am excited by that, but I am also scared because every time in history it has been met with violence. And I can't think of an example. I can't think of an example in American history where the response to that coalition wasn't violence. And so that's something we have to think about, that the people who do not want to see this country change are prepared to do a lot to prevent it from changing.
Well, but people who do want it to change are prepared to do a lot too.
That's right.
And that is the encouraging thing. One of your heroes, and talking about this spark that pops up throughout our history in various parts of the country, is Ida B. Wells, a woman journalist, a fierce force for justice and fairness, that most people, if they know the name at all, they don't know why they know the name. Why is Ida B. Wells one of your heroes?
Oh man, I mean, where do you begin? On first off, just in the most simple sense, she is arguably the mother of civil disobedience in American politics,
Yes,
certainly in Black politics. She was the first person. She kept, I mean, she remember this is a woman. She was born, I believe, I can't remember whether she was born a slave,
she
but
was.
Yes,
she
she
was
was.
born, but quite young, right? And so she's in that first generation of people to grow up free, right? To grow up out after emancipation, and they are really, really, really steeped in this effort to say, hey, as Black people, we have to earn our freedom, right? Like we have to show people that we aren't, that all these things they say about Black people aren't true, that we're super smart, we're super ambitious, we're super eager, that we're patriots, that we're
Yeah,
ready, and that was her generation. And she really believed that. But very quickly, in part because she was a Black woman, and being a woman put her in a unique position in society to see some of the lies, um, led her, soon she realized this is a trick bag. We can never earn our way out of oppression. Like there's no amount of achievement that's going to convince them, because it doesn't profit them for us to have these businesses, to have these elected positions, to have this kind of power. It doesn't profit the slavocracy, who still existed and I argue still exist. It does not profit them. And so the only answer is that we have to fight. We have to agitate for our
yes,
freedom. And she
yes,
was the first, certainly, I don't know if she was certainly the first Black political figure to say that. And we don't know that. So many people don't know that about
yeah,
her,
right,
in part because she's a woman. And so she was written out of Black history until fairly recently, until more Black women became scholars who could talk about her, people like
right,
Paul
yeah.
Whittier, biographer. So she's just inspiring to me because I think she's the root of a lot of my personal politics, and a lot of our politics.
And drawing again from Jesse Jackson, he once said that remember that the agitator is the center post in the washing machine that gets the dirt out.
That's
so,
right. Good
so
intelligence.
she certainly has been that. You've been that, and it is that agitation that is the most promising thing in America. That is the progressive core of America, I think. And one thing I liked about Ida B. Wells is uh, she like all of us kind of had to incrementally grow up
Yeah.
in the political world and to begin to perceive uh, the realities and the fictions. And at some point, she said she finally asked, "What's really going on here?"
Yeah.
and that is a radical question that crops up in people too. I had a friend when I was first campaigning for political office down here, Black leader over in the Tyler, Texas area. And he had been a Vietnam. He'd gone to Vietnam, and he had had a very hard recovery from that, mental recovery from it. And I asked him, well, why are you in politics? Why are you messing with this? And he said, because I never, again, don't want not to know what's really going on,
Mm,
because he had been
mm,
lied to go to
yeah.
Vietnam,
That's right.
and
That's
and
right.
he understood that, and so that's a lesson for all of us. I
Can I
think,
ask you
and
a question about that? Because
yeah,
so where you sit right now in Texas, thinking about this, and you mentioned earlier also how one of the things is like white folks have to be able to see that this system doesn't benefit me. It's sort of adjacent to this idea of like not of being able to see, wait, what's really going on here? And I feel
right,
like one of the COVID, I mean, I'm not making a profound statement here, but like one of the things about COVID is that so many people have been forced to ask, wait a minute,
yeah,
what's really going on here? And wow, does this really benefit me? And I just wonder if you're seeing that in Texas now and thinking about amongst white people in
yeah,
particular, um, whether or not there's this how the moment of seeing how much the system has not been built to protect any of us in this
yeah.
moment, how that's changing people's political consciousness around this.
Oh yeah. I mean, just one COVID example was a story I saw today. I think of a young guy, 20 something, and had gone to a party. There were Trump people gone to a party, a social party, intentionally, not wearing masks and making the point, we don't need masks, God's going to protect us, and he died. And in his last day, he was saying to his nurse, I thought this was a hoax. It's not a hoax, he said. Well, that's a heavy lesson to learn. At the very last, let's hope we can learn it earlier than that. But there's still this amazing optimism that people have. This belief that things can be better, and we tap into that. We might and tap into the reality of our history. You mentioned Tulsa. Ironically, Ida B. Wells recommended, she was in Memphis at the time, and recommended that people go to Oklahoma. Go to Oklahoma. It's a free state, and there's not much violence there. Well, then in 1921, I guess it was, there was the Tulsa riot. That was just grotesque. And now, though, they're literally that history was literally buried. I mean, we don't know how many people, but at least 300 were buried, and black people were murdered and buried, prosperous black people, in a mass grave there, and they're now beginning to uncover that grave. That is really a moment in history. You can't deny that. That's I don't know. I can't even find a comparison to it, but you can't deny that reality if you surface that. And here it is. This is what happened. This is what we did. Then we have to face that. So let's talk about what we should be doing. One, obviously, I hear this throughout the George Floyd movement days now, that we have to talk about it. And in particular, black people. White people have got to talk about it. Have got to address
black people
this
too.
reality. Yeah, black people too, absolutely. Because it's hard. It's hard for everybody. And it seems to me, my own experience is that, as I said, I went through high school in integrated and segregated schools. And then I went 70 miles away to North Texas State University, which had integrated in 1954. And so I was sitting next to black students from my home of Denison, Texas, and at North Texas State University, whom I had never known. Well, the lie was obvious. So when you see the lie, when you're sitting next to it, and you're talking to people in real time and in real conversation, you can't deny the lie, and you can't help but see the humanity that is possible here. It would get beyond the lie. So talk to me a little bit, because how do you talk to about white privilege to white people who don't feel particularly privileged?
Well, I don't. It's the work of other white people. There's nothing. There's literally nothing I can say to a white person about their privilege that they can hear. If it's because it's just on the basics of communication. It's an accusation coming from me. And there's nothing I can do about it. My work is in convincing black people to stand up and own their power. Is something I can do. But I think what is important, that I think that there's a couple things. One is that the example you point out, we still don't acknowledge how segregated our lives remain. Like we live in an enormously racially segregated country. It is still the case. There are huge swaths of life. There are a lot of people, particularly white people, who do not engage with anybody other than white people outside of their jobs, and that will distort your reality, right? So not enough people have the experience that you just described, where they can look and be like, oh. And I think part of what happened in this past few months is that between COVID and the lockdown, and then the particular sadism of George Floyd's murder, and then when white people marched, the particular, the ways in which police forces all across the country responded to those white people. There was enormous numbers of white people,
Right.
I believe, had a real life personal experience of the way that you
Right.
just described, where
Yeah.
they were like, oh shit, wait a minute. This is it. This is a thing. Like, these people will do whatever they will do whatever they want to anybody to protect their power. They will do that. They
Right.
will knock down a 70-something-year-old white man who is walking in the street and literally break his head open and then blame him for having fallen down.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
they will do that. And people, so a lot of
Yeah.
people had that experience in a way that they didn't because of segregation until just now. And so that's a good thing, right? Like, so there's a lot of people who are having that moment where they're open to hearing about, oh, okay, this system is built wrong, and it's built to advantage me, and I need to take it apart. Now,
Yeah.
here's the tricky part where we're at, Hightower, and where, like, I encourage my white brothers and sisters to have this conversation with each other, is you gotta sit in it, because it's not going to go away. It's not one conversation.
Right.
It's not going to go away because we marched these 3 months. This is a law. It's not going to go away. If Donald Trump is defeated resoundly and marched out and tarred and feathered, it is not going to go away. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
there is
I agree, and
long
I
period.
do look forward to that tarring and feathering. By the way,
I-
but that aside,
that laid to the side.
yeah.
As,
But that
as,
aside,
that laid to the
yes,
side. The work will
yes,
still be there. And historically, what hasn't happened is that when white people have had moments of awakening like this, historically, they have not been willing to sit in it. And that has been a problem because it's been met with violence, because it's met with more theft that leads to recessions and depressions and pain. It will involve pain. And so in order to get to the other side, we're gonna have to all sit in it, and that's gonna be hard. That's true for Black people too, by the way. I need to say,
yeah,
to middle class Black folks also have trouble sitting in it sometimes. Middle class Black people, like, got to sit in it. But
yeah,
you asked me about white folks. White people have got to sit in this
yes,
and
and talk
and
to each other,
shore each other up,
as well as talk to Black
you
people.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
shore each
Okay,
other up. Like,
okay.
yes,
All right.
you know.
We've got we got some folks, Deanna says, who are screaming to get into the conversation here. So let's take a comment or two. Deanna, what do we have?
Hey, this is Deanna. I'm the sidekick here, and I'm looking at all of the comments coming in, and I just have to tell you both, like, the amount of people that this conversation is resonating with is unbelievable. Like, we have not seen this before. The number of people that are clapping and cheering and saying, yes, we have to sit with the discomfort as white people. Yes, that we actually have to address this within our own communities. That feels just incredibly resonant, incredibly strong. That it's systemic. One of the things that and we've got a number of questions that are related from different parts of this conversation that y'all have had along. I didn't want to interrupt your flow. But one thing that that I have always noted was, as far as the historical stuff that we've talked about, one moment in history that always stands out to me is when the Black Panthers in Chicago started to organize with poor white people from Appalachia who had come for factory jobs, is when the state started coming after and murdering Black activists and Panthers in America. Because what happens when we, as white folks, as rural and lower class white folks, come together with folks who are not privileged in other ways from race and ethnicity and all those things, we we find an incredible amount of strength and an incredible amount of power. There are so many questions that have happened. I don't know where y'all want to start. We could talk about folks want to know what y'all think of who Joe Biden's VP pick should be. This was one of our early questions early on. I believe from Cheryl, and that's another thing that I wanted to say. We have folks from Iowa, we have folks from Missouri, we have folks from Oregon, Texas, Massachusetts, California. Everybody's here tonight, so I just want to give a shout out to everybody who's joined with us tonight. So
Let
thinking
me
about that,
let me just
Joe
let me
Biden.
just
get in there,
yeah,
get in there,
right.
Hightower.
Well, let me just say something that I think Kai said earlier that's important, and that is this isn't going away just because Joe Biden gets elected and somebody gets elected vice president. I've said before that I don't care if Biden is a 200-pound sack of concrete, we're going to carry him to victory because we've got to get beyond where we are now. But that's only the starting point. And I think that's the way progressives in America, black, white, Latino, et cetera, have got to address. We've got to form an actual movement, and a movement that moves, and that means a movement that actually it isn't just about committee meetings and marches and stuff, but a group of people, and this is what the populists did in the 1870s, 1880s. They formed a cultural movement, and they began to understand each other a little bit, and that's what we have to do. We have to focus on ourselves. I think we know who the bastards are.
Preach. And and I would just echo to say that one of the challenges with progressive politics is that there is. And it's, I mean, listen, the presidency is a very important thing. So I'm not arguing that but at the same time, I think what movement do is understand that whoever holds power, the point is to have a constituency that they must be accountable to. In the same way that every mayor, regardless of their party and ideology, has to deal with their police union, right? Like, there's a reason why left, right, center, black, white, purple, every mayor is always a disappointment around policing because they have this constituency of cops that they have to respond to. So there needs to be a progressive constituency at every level that you have to respond to, whatever party you're from and whatever your ideology is, if there's going to be actual change. And so that's not to dodge the question. I do have feelings about the vice president's choice, but like the more important point you are making, Hightower, that like if you want to see change, it is about being a constituency. No matter who holds power, you have to answer to us.
Right. First, we're going to beat Trump, then we've got to beat Biden. That's what we face, I think. But that's all right. That's all right.
I have to say, like, I remember when Obama first came in, and one of my more disappointing moments, I was at the time, I was writing a lot about the way banks were stealing from Black people at the beginning of the foreclosure crisis. That was the drum I was beating. And I can remember being at a number of public events where I was talking about that and saying, listen, this new president, he has established a Treasury Department of Wall Street people, Timothy Geithner and the likes. And if we're going to really fix the problem of banks stealing from Black people, we need to keep our eye on that. And I on at least two occasions, I can remember literally not being able to get out of the room because Black people were so upset with me about talking about Barack Obama. And that was true for the 8 years. And like, I could have been a better communicator about, I understand, like, but like, it's the point is like, we have to figure out how not to be so obsessed with the leader, and more obsessed with whoever they are, and more obsessed with us and what we demand from that leadership.
Bingo. Fantastic. Deanna, do we have one more that you want to throw at us here?
I mean, I have about 8,000 that I want to throw at you, but
try to be less long-winded in our responses.
No, no, it's great.
I'm off script. It's I can't help it. I just got a lot to say now. I don't have to meet a clock.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no. Yeah.
We've got wine. We're fine here. It's all good. there are so many questions like, what do you all think of Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, and how does that play out racially? What do you think of the specifics around the fact that police brutality ends up affecting people with disabilities far more than people who run along kind of normal abilities perspectives, and certainly in communities of color. I mean, I think one of the most striking things that I've seen in the last few years is a giant, just a piece of plywood erected in front of a person's home that was spray painted with a message that said, there is a person with autism that lives here, and he is not dangerous, but he does not understand you, and he is black. And what that kinds of that stuff kind of ends up meaning, and that ties back in.
Let's pick up on that a little bit,
Yeah.
Kai, just for a second at last, because obviously defund the police or police brutality generally. One, it's a reality, and that nobody can now deny, and then two, it's a real issue. But it seems to me that the core problem of police is who we're recruiting, and what we're asking police to do. There are various functions, and it seems to me police are being asked to do things they're not equipped to do, and that the only tool they have is brutality, including weaponry that is extraordinary. And we need to be recruiting a different kind of a police force that goes back to being, the neighborhood cop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, was it ever the neighborhood cop? I don't know, but like I think you're right in the sense of the core problem is that police departments are a political constituency, and we don't think of them that way. We talk about them as blah blah, public servants. It is a political constituency inside every city, and they exist independent, despite the fact that they report to mayors. They exist independent of the elected leadership. They're their own constituency. And and between the money that they have been given by the federal government and the money that they're able to get through lobbying as a political constituency at the local level, they have grown into these bureaucracies that are, since we've been talking about banks, that are often considered too big to fail. And so
armed bureaucracies
and happen to be armed. And so to your point, all of the things that we don't actually fund get funneled through the police department because they're the only thing that we fund. So social services get funneled through the police department. All kinds of this stuff gets funneled through the police department. And so it's so that is a fundamental structural problem. But I'd also say that I just have to say, like, I have arrived. I mean, in New York City, the city council is talking about passing a law, like this is in the suite of the reforms, that amongst the things they're proud of is like legislating that police officers cannot cover their badges. And I would argue that if you have arrived at a place after decades and decades of reform efforts, if you have arrived at a place where you have to legislate that they cannot cover their badges, you may be past the point of reform.
Yeah,
and like
you've chosen the wrong people.
I don't know that it's about individuals. That's what I'm pushing back on. It's like I think
it's institutional.
It's the very fact of the thing. Like so I just think there is these are political constituencies, and we need to start talking about them that way, and everything else goes from there. I do want to say a word about the wealth tax thing. I'll say it very quickly. Is that one of the things I learned in the course of making this season of the United States of Anxiety is that the wealth tax is an idea that goes all the way back to Reconstruction. And so I would invite people to listen to the first episode of our season where I went and followed a family in Mississippi, in the Delta of Mississippi, their story about their land. They have a piece of land. They're farmers that have a piece of land they've had in their family longer than they can remember where it came from. And I was trying to learn the history of that land. And it's a bit of a mystery, so I don't want to give it away too much. But the point is, I learned about all, coming out of the Civil War during Reconstruction, there's all the federal stuff we talked about, but at the state and local level, there were all these efforts to redistribute wealth.
Right.
Because the slaveholders had gathered up all of the goddamn wealth. And including, literally, they owned all the land. They had all this land they were just sitting on, and that was uncultivated.
They owned
And
the banks. They owned
they owned the
everything.
banks, they owned everything. And so these new coalition governments of newly freed Black people and white people and white Republicans who were trying to get out from underneath those slavocracy started coming up with all kinds of ways to break up that wealth and redistribute it. There was a moment in American history where we had a very active conversation about wealth redistribution. And it was happening. It literally was happening at the state level in Mississippi, of all places. And it was working. It was working wonderfully. And so it is, we can think of it as a radical idea right now, but it actually goes back to the Civil War. It goes back to our founding. And so I would urge people to think more deeply about wealth redistribution.
And I think it goes back further. It goes back to biblical times, right? Every 7 years there was to be a redistribution taking place. So, let's get into the church here.
There we go. Wherever you want to come at it from.
That's right. It's there.
An old, important idea for human beings.
Well, Kai Wright, you are fantastic. He's the United States of anxiety, but he is relieving my anxiety to know that there is some possibility, some little glimmer of hope out there, if we all just try to really work on this. And it is work, and it is hard, but
stay in it.
It's the core of whether we're going to have a little d democracy in our country that is more than just words on a piece of paper. How do folks stay in touch with you, Kai?
You can follow me on Twitter, Kai_Wright. That's KAI_Wright. Or you can go to WNYC.org/anxiety and get every week's episode.
That is Wright, WRIGHT, who is also RIGHT on most issues there. We want to have you back on a regular basis, if you don't mind.
I'm always happy to join you.
This is going to be an ongoing conversation on our happy hour, because it is happy. The joy is in the fight.
The joy is in the fight.
And we have to realize that. Thank you, Kai Wright. And thanks to all of you for sticking with us here on the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.